Hi, this is Dr. Roop, Monica Gill, and today I have the great pleasure of being with Coach C, my friend Christine. Hey, Christine.
Hi.
Good, good. I wanted to introduce a little bit about Christine. She is the founder and CEO of Contrast Results Group. It's a group based out of Canada that provides coaching type services to corporate, and she individualizes the interventions that are required for peak performance. And I am interested in peak performance because my company is based on beauty built on health. We want to optimize not just physical beauty and health, but the many aspects of beauty. When somebody comes to me to feel their best and look their best, it involves more than the superficial. And one thing that resonated between Christine and me this last week was the finding that with coronavirus, there would be more deaths due to suicide than due to the actual virus. And that's obviously not healthy. So we were like, what is going on? And a lot of us think about suicide as related to a mental disorder or related to addiction and overdoses, but there's a whole group of suicides that happen that are not like directly related to those things. And not only is it about suicide, but the much smaller degrees of people feeling a sense of emptiness, a sense of meaninglessness in their day-to-day, a sense of desperation and despair. And I know that Christine has a story to discuss too with this last week that happened with her.
Yeah. So a lot of the work that we do in our coaching is with entrepreneurs and executives. And one of the things that happened to one of my clients is one of the partners in her firm, and it's a law firm here in Canada, he committed suicide. And this is on the rise. So as you said, Monica, the challenges that people are faced with aren't necessarily bucketed into they must have mental illness or suffer from depression or be in addiction or in some kind of crisis. Often suicide happens after someone has a big win, after someone has actually sees line of sight to something powerful happening in their life. So a solution is about to happen and they commit suicide. So I always say in our coaching practice that you are one thought away from having a different life. And it's that one thought, that subconscious thinking that can actually trigger an entire momentous event. And this is something that COVID has definitely shone a light on. And, successful people all over the globe are experiencing either the impact or the trauma because they've had a close relative commit suicide and what that leaves in its wake. And I think you're seeing the beginning of this phenomena, not the end. And the other part of it that you talked about was that fundamentally, when we have an experience of extreme loneliness or something has driven up an emotion of not belonging, not feeling connected, not feeling loved, any of those things can spark those thoughts, can spark dark thoughts, can spark that tendency. And people are taking their lives that don't fit into what we would classify the traditional classifications of suicidal tendencies. So there's a whole new world of issues that we want to be awake to and conscious of as either company leaders, as thought provokers, or as people in business. What are the things that are happening not only to ourselves, but also our colleagues, our peers, our families?
Yeah, and that's a great point. You mentioned that one of your coachees had a suicide in his partner, but even at that, not at that extreme level. But I've noticed because I was looking into what can you do to prevent it, and I was looking at emotional nurturance, and some things came up that would actually help me improve the performance of my team. And none of them are suicidal. They're all generally happy, good people. But I noticed that one of them gets very upset when I mention anything wrong. And she's a hard worker. She's very good at what she does. But there's an element of self-criticism that's going on there. And I've noticed that not only can we use this kind of information to prevent disasters, but to optimize performance, to be able to ease people into a higher caliber of performance where she can take the feedback and go with it and run with it rather than use it to shut down or feel inadequate.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because often peak performers are very critical. They're self-judgmental, they're They're very hard on themselves, and it comes with teenagers, athletes, anyone who has strived for something extraordinary in their life will be very self-critical. And they've often had coaches, especially if they're athletic, or they have come from a background where they've had someone pushing them to be better, go for it, you can do more. If you've had those experiences, you can often end up in a vicious cycle. Like Olympic athletes, 87% of Olympic athletes suffer from suicide and depression, those thoughts. And that's a real impact that we have if you just take that subset of group and you look at why, and it's that negative self-talk. It's questioning oneself, not feeling good enough, not feeling adequate, and it's one moment of not feeling adequate that can change the way we operate. And it's important to uncover that those thoughts and understand what's really driving the bus.
And there's one thing I wanted to differentiate. You use the word thoughts, and it is a lot. The thoughts is the way we can intervene it, but the question is whether those thoughts even come up to our awareness.
Right.
And this whole conversation is, we're talking about emptiness. We're talking about something, not that something's wrong with somebody, but that something was missing in their training, in their education, in their being raised, in how they know what to do with. It's also a cultural phenomena as to, we're not supposed to like have emotions at work apart from being happy. You know, we always have to present this face of professionalism, and we're not really taught how to deal with emotions. They're like a bad thing, when actually emotions can give you like the meaning and the flavor and the juice in life, you know. And I
love that you're talking about the emotional elements, because your emotions inform your thoughts, and your thoughts reinforce your emotions. So they're completely connected. The thought and the articulation of the thought is the response to an emotional experience. And we house emotion as bad or wrong. And the reality of our emotions is we have no control over how our emotions will arise or what will spur on an emotion. And they do run a lot of our subconscious thinking, and they're very, very entrenched at a cellular level. Our emotional responses to things. Have you ever had an experience of you're emotional over something and it's not the thing that happened right now? It's reminding you of an experience from your past that is having that emotional reaction.
Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah, it's that response, that emotional response. And emotion can also be described in many things as a hormonal response, like a serotonin or adrenaline. Those are emotional reactions, and the higher level those emotions are, the higher level those things are, the more you will remember that. And so depending on how challenging those emotional responses were and what age you are, I'll give you a perfect example. You said about being happy at work. Well, I'm not happy today. I haven't been happy since yesterday. And happiness is an emotion that we kind of impose on ourselves. We should be happy. And the truth is, I'm really sad. I dropped my eldest child off at university yesterday, and it has been just really an emotional reaction that I wasn't anticipating. And I wasn't ready for it, and I've had deep sadness. And the more I just allow the deep sadness and be honest with people, I've cried on 2 coaching calls today, I've gotten weepy with people, that's okay, because that's where I am. I can't resist those feelings and those emotions. I have them. I'm a human being. There's also that element. Yeah.
Is you are the boss, you know, and there's a different expectation. Like the boss has a certain freedom, a certain leeway to express those, whereas people who are at work, they might not have that same freedom, you know. So it's and it may be that you're in meetings where you don't have that freedom, and you're a very authentic person. You're very connected with who you are, and that keeps you always real and keeps you honest, and you're not going to end up in like a surprise moment that puts you over the edge, you know, because it's a process of the skills that you've acquired, the skills that you teach in your coaching, using those every day and allowing and being. But what I wanted to have people get from this podcast is why it's important to understand how to handle emotions and how to use emotions to it's your new puppy.
Working.
how to use emotions to further your business, because as we're always taught, the people buy because of emotional reasons, and they justify it with logic. So emotions aren't something that are like peripheral or to be ignored. They're something that is the core of business. Relationships are the core of business. And making those that it's, so it's not just, it's, suicide is super important, and that's why what triggered this. But I want to talk about suicide all the way to peak performance, all the way to like get the best you can out of this.
Let's really unpack that, because you said a lot of very powerful things. And the first piece is, I can have my emotions, I don't have to be them. And they don't have to run the show. Once I distinguish sadness and that I'm having an experience of sadness, I can still function fully. But it's the knowing and distinguishing the experience and having the emotions and calling them out for what they are, as opposed to just letting the sadness run the show. If I wasn't conscious, so that brings me to, you bring your emotional consciousness up. Yeah. And that's one of the tools that we as a group, as business owners, the higher level your consciousness, the higher level you'll be aware of what emotional experience you are having right now. And your emotional experiences can change in a heartbeat, in a nanosecond. So it's very important to be aware of that. And I think I take for granted that I have access to those tools, and a lot of leaders and a lot of business owners don't. So it's conscious awareness.
And to echo that, the tightness of the team, a lot depends on how much they feel valued, and being valued is financial, but it's also noticing if they're upset, what caused it, and in yourself, what caused the upset. And that is part of the loyalty, part of the team working together.
Yes. And I think sometimes teams tend to operate on top of their emotional response instead of just owning it.
That's a great point.
So when you're angry, for instance, you'll often see people withdraw because they're angry, and you know they're visibly upset, and they're pulling away, they're pulling internally because they're having an emotional reaction, and they don't know how to express that in a powerful way that doesn't invalidate the people around them. So why do we suppress our emotions? Because we're afraid of getting our emotional response on other people. Well, sometimes you're going to. Sometimes what there is to do is allow for and give permission for the emotional response, and then clean it up. Life is messy, but when you hold on to that emotional response and you internalize that anger, there's no outlet. If it's sadness, if it's anger, if it's frustration, if it's not feeling included in something or not feeling valued, those experiences unexpressed lead to what I call mischievous behaviors. People withdraw, they aren't as open and forthright, they don't tell you what's going on, so you're often left guessing and wondering, did I do something? And then it all comes down to what's wrong.
Yeah.
Versus I'm having an emotional experience and being authentic. And really great teams allow for that, but they also create structures for assistance that have those emotional responses so that there's not a lot of damage done.
Yeah. And that brings out 2 or 3 great points that I wanted to reiterate that people may have missed. One is the awareness of the emotion, having that in consciousness. The second is the expression of that emotion, whether that is to yourself, to somebody in private, or to whatever caused it. And the third is the structures that are put in place to deal with that. There's also an element of, and I think those structures are the responsibility of the leadership to have something in place that maximizes the team and deals with conflicts. I was reading that it's actually a great marriage, a great partnership has to have fighting in it. It's like, if you're not fighting, you're not being honest, and you're not being authentic and using all of what you have, but it's how you deal with the fighting. It's how you deal with the differences of opinion. Because if somebody's afraid to give their opinion in a team, you could be losing out on a gold mine, of something obvious to them that you don't even realize. So creating those structures that will allow that to come up. The other aspect, and we're going to talk more about that in a future podcast, because
there's a lot of richness in that.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to see that we will be talking about is, because we were going to do it over one podcast, and we realized there's so so much material. We can't share it all in one, so we're going to do a series. The other thing is about your the way that you feed yourself, your health. And why I got interested in that was because a lot of people are overweight because of emotional eating. And so what is this emotional eating? Are you supposed to just have willpower that like defeats emotional eating? It doesn't work. You know? So,
no amount of willpower will address that.
So it's actually a whole way of learning what to do with the emotions, and rather than just sort of like, I'm going to ignore it until 2 weeks are over and then I can eat whatever I want or whatever it is. It doesn't work. So the whole aspect of self-care goes from initially, and I love this book by Dr. Janice Webb called Running on Empty, Janice Webb, sorry, and she talks a lot about many people don't have emotional deprivation like an orphanage or that level of abuse, but many people just don't get enough attention as they're growing up, and enough training in how to deal with their emotions from their parents, because many of the parents didn't know either, you know. So we have to like correct that by ourselves. And having that self-care, it involves things like changing your priorities, putting yourself first, and like changing the way you eat. For example, like I eat a lot of people eat frozen food or takeouts because they don't prioritize their own health, you know, and they like, oh, it doesn't matter. But would you treat that to your friend? Would you have your friend eat frozen meals all the time? You know, it's like, it's a different level of self-care. So shifting that and exercise and rest, but then there's also improving self-discipline. Oddly enough, a lot of people with this emotional neglect, there's a resistance to life because society has us deny our emotions. Like school, you don't want to be emotional. Work, you don't want to be emotional. Like when can you be emotional? Will some of your friends maybe, but there's an element of restriction, and part of us rebels against that with like, okay, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. You know, there's a self-discipline that gets eroded, and that hurts us at the end of the day. And we can be very disciplined in some aspects of our lives, but like really bad at others. I'm sure you found that too, Christine?
1,000%. And I think the challenge with understanding the why behind what we do when we do it, and the emotional responses, it's a very subconscious emotional response. So we don't walk around with our feelings on our sleeve. They're very much ingrained in a very subconscious level. It's one of the reasons that I launched Brain Cap Coach recently, because it allows you to understand the subconscious emotional responses that are running and driving the behaviors and actions that we take. So our emotions and our thoughts create our belief systems, our perceptions, and the actions that we take. So for instance, the emotional eater, or you also mentioned something about, you know, don't have those emotions. Here's how you know people are suppressing their emotions. Give them a glass of wine or some alcohol. The emotional risk, because that takes the lid off that suppression, and you will watch their emotional responses flare to the surface. Why? Because they've been so busy trying to control those emotions. Well, guess what? They're not controllable. They're at the level of subconsciousness that the only way to understand it is to bring them into awareness, and then look at, how are these emotions serving me? And having the ability to hold it all versus having to reach for extra glasses of wine, because that one glass of wine will turn into bottles of wine, or reaching for sugar, reaching for the fast carbohydrate intake. Those are things that people, once they're aware of what's going on and what those emotions are that are driving their beliefs and perceptions about themselves, that's how we shift that. We can't shift it otherwise.
Yeah, that is so crucial, that non-judgmental approach to emotion. And instead of judging it, the next question is, okay, why? What is it telling me? And there's a little list of things that was in Jonas's book that was saying, like, anger is actually useful to push us to fight back and for self-protection. Hurt pushes us to correct a situation. So emotions are actually useful information that we just need to figure out, what is it telling me? How can I use this? And complete the situation that caused it, instead of ignoring it and having a perpetual cycle where you don't get beyond it to something that's a healthier life, you know?
And you talked about anger, and anger actually, the front of the hand and the back of the hand, if you look at it, anger and love. So it's very hard to have an experience of love when you have an experience of anger. At the same time, a lack of love will evoke the emotion of anger. So when you feel rejected or you feel that you're not valued and you're not loved, you will become angry. If you are put into an experience where somebody's going to harm you, you will become angry. Sorry for the dogs barking in the background, but it's an important emotion because we think we shouldn't have, and I use that word should. We shouldn't on ourselves all the time. We shouldn't have those feelings. If you can't have anger, you can't have love. If you don't have sadness, you won't find that happiness. They're required. They're a part of the human experience. And when we tell ourselves it's not acceptable and we shouldn't have these emotional responses, we're suppressing that huge part of our human experience, which makes us authentic and which makes us actually build relationships with other people. If you want to be more connected with people, be vulnerable. Yeah. Share with them what's really going on.
But I have to say, though, there's a strategy to being vulnerable because you don't want to be stupid and tell everybody everything. Because
no, that's not the same thing.
Be used against you, yeah. So it's and we're going to talk about strategies. Like, it's not about like laying all your dirty laundry out there. It's about being strategic. And you also have to, it's useful to have behaviors. There's talk about self-soothing behaviors. And yes, there's like eating, shopping, and all sorts of other self-soothings, but there's also healthy self-soothings, like your dog that you got that I hear. Sitting a dog is great, you know? And
well, let's talk about the why of the dog. So we have a beautiful dog. She's 4, and we wanted to, you know, I knew September was coming and that my eldest was leaving home. And I have 3 children. One is 7, one is 16, and one is 18. And we purchased this puppy who is a mini Roodle. Our older dog is a Woodle, and this is a mini Roodle. And I could tell when we were making the choice to purchase the puppy that it was a distraction for my sadness of my elder son leaving. And I justified it. I have to justify things, right? Because that's what human beings do. We justify and we rationalize. So I justified it with it's for Chase, who's our 7-year-old, because when his big brother goes off to university, it's going to be quite painful. The reality is sometimes we use distractions. There are healthy distractions and there are unhealthy distractions. And the love of a puppy is a healthy distraction.
Yeah.
It's a healthy distraction. So it's okay to understand when you're trying to distract yourself from having all the feels and feeling the feelings that you have. It's really okay.
And to build in those self-soothing systems, because you like we have to build in certain foods to support us, we have to build in certain systems and behaviors to support us as part of our emotional nurturance. And what I love for you, I love the way that you talked about how you were today, where you had compassion for yourself. And that compassion is such a it's a rarity that people don't give themselves, you know, and we give it to our friends, but we don't give it to ourselves. And I love that today you did, you know, you were like, my eldest just left.
I'm sad. I'm feeling it. And, you know, I also have this saying, when anyone tells me I'm fine, they'll use the word, have you ever asked someone, how are you doing? And they'll say, I'm fine. And the acronym for fine is effed up, insecure, neurotic episode. When anyone ever tells me that, I say, really? Tell me what's really going on is having you have a neurotic, an effed up, insecure, neurotic episode, because I'm curious. And they look at me and I said, well, you use the word fine, so I suspect there's something else going on. And I use that jokingly because laughter is also a source of an access point when you're dealing with someone you know they're having an emotional response, but they say that I'm fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. It's just suppressing how they feel.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you asked why, because a lot of our communication is horizontal, transactional, like 90% is about information, but it's that vertical communication that builds those tight bonds and really makes progress. And that's what I love about you, about Polly, about my dearest friends, is that having that vertical conversation. We talk about like beauty, and we talk about like what's going on in the world politically, but we can also talk about like heart to heart, and that is so precious, and that's what I really value about the people closest to me. And so we're almost out of time, but I just wanted everyone to get a sampling of the kind of things we'll be covering. We'll be covering like the whys, the strategies, the benefits, and giving you some game plans on how to move ahead. There is a questionnaire called it's from on Dr. Jonas's website, and if you want to email us, either Coach C or myself, can you give me your email for?
Sure. So you can reach me at on Instagram at Coach C Official. You can do the messenger, or you can email admin, ADMIN, at contrastconsultingco.com. That's a long one, but that's the fast track to get to me and get on my calendar. We're on LinkedIn as well, direct message on LinkedIn, Christine Nielson, Nielsen, Contrast Results Group, Facebook, Instagram. We're everywhere. You'll find us. And then you can also find Dr. Roop Monica Gill, who is extraordinary at what she does. I want to tie one thing back, because this is about health and wellness and beauty. And I really believe that our beauty it's an inside out job. So the conversation around emotion and the conversation around, this phenomena of, people committing suicide and those things, it's a pointing guide to what we want to attend to have that beauty from the inside out realized. And I think that's a really important message for the listeners of this podcast.
Yeah, it's about creating a beautiful life, and that doesn't happen many times by accident. It's about being proactive and putting in the pieces to have the most out of your own life, your family, your colleagues, and really using what we have to further our own lives and leave a legacy. So I think that it has a lot of we have a responsibility to ourselves to take care of ourselves and to enjoy our lives. We're gonna have fun, So we hope you'll join us again. You can reach me at info@pulsarhealth.com, PULSAR health.com, and we will. Dr. Jonas Webb, Running on Empty, is the reference that I had, and she has a questionnaire called Childhood Emotional Neglect.
Childhood Emotional Neglect.
Yeah, CEN, and you can take that questionnaire and get an idea of where you're at on the spectrum. But it's not about abnormal. It's about realizing that normal sometimes doesn't get what it needs to function at its best, and we're here to help with that. We're here to like give you the tools, give you what you want. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure talking with Christine.
Awesome.
Time always flies by when I'm with you, Christine. I don't know, it's just like whoosh whoosh whoosh. So, I love it. All right,
Monica.
take care. Bye-bye.